Part 7. The silent drive begins. The sky was painted in shades of dusky orange and pale purple as the sun dipped below the city skyline. The hum of the car's engine filled the otherwise silent space between you and Tae as he maneuvered the sleek black vehicle through the evening traffic. The meeting with Park Hyung-sik had ended hours ago, but the weight of Hyung-sik's teasing words still hung heavy in the air. Is she my sister-in-law? You stared out the window, your fingers clutching your bag tightly on your lap. Tae, on the other hand, kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight and brows furrowed in concentration. The tension in the car was palpable, and yet, neither of you spoke. In reality, Tae's mind was far from the road. What am I doing? The thought repeated in Tae's head like a broken record. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady his erratic heartbeat. When Hyung-sik had joked about you being his sister-in-law, Tae's carefully constructed walls had cracked walls he had spent years building to protect himself and those he cared about. But you had slipped through those walls effortlessly. He glanced at you briefly out of the corner of his eye. You were staring out the window, your lips slightly pursed, lost in thought. A soft sigh escaped him as he quickly turned his attention back to the road. His chest felt tight, almost suffocating. What if she rejects me? That was the first thought that clawed at his mind. But the second thought was darker. What if something happens to her, because of me? Tae's world wasn't safe. It was a world of shadows, danger, and blood-stained hands. He had tried to keep you away from it, tried to keep you on the safe side of his life, but every interaction, every meeting, every stolen glance, brought you closer to the edge of the storm that surrounded him. I can't let anything happen to her. But at the same time, another voice whispered back at him, a softer, more vulnerable voice he hadn't heard in years. But I can't live without her either. For so long, Tae had believed himself to be untouchable, a fortress of steel and ice. But you had found the cracks in his armor, and instead of breaking him, you had filled those cracks with warmth. You had become his sanctuary. When he was with you, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Real, unfiltered peace. And happiness. He thought back to all those moments with you. The way you'd scrunch up your nose when you were focused on a design draft. The way you'd roll your eyes at his teasing but couldn't hide your smile. The way your laughter seemed to echo in his chest long after you'd stopped laughing. Each memory tightened the knot in his chest. I love her. The realization hit him like a freight train. It wasn't something he had planned. It wasn't something he had expected. But it was there, undeniable and unshakable. He loved you. And now, he couldn't imagine a world without you in it. But that love came with a heavy burden of fear that his love would be your downfall. What if his enemies found out about you? What if you became a target because of him? His grip on the steering wheel tightened again, and he cursed under his breath. I'm being selfish. But even as he thought it, another realization crept in. I can't let her go. Tae pulled the car into your apartment's parking lot and shifted it into park, but neither of you moved. The engine idled softly, filling the heavy silence. You finally turned to face him, your brows knitted in concern. Tae, are you okay? Your soft voice broke through the storm in his mind, and he turned to look at you. For a brief moment, he just stared. Your eyes, wide and full of worry. Your lips slightly parted, as if you had more to say but couldn't find the words. How could someone like me deserve someone like her? But then again, how could he let you go? He took a deep breath and leaned back in his seat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Yn," he started, his voice low and rough. "There's something I need to tell you." Your expression shifted, your concern deepened, but you nodded silently, waiting for him to continue. But the words wouldn't come out. How do I tell her I love her? How do I tell her about the shadows I carry? Fear gnawed at his chest again. Fear of scaring you away. Fear of putting you in danger. Fear of losing you forever. After a few agonizing seconds, he sighed deeply and looked away, staring out the windshield. Not tonight, he said softly, almost to himself. You blinked. What? Nothing, he muttered, shaking his head. It's late. You should head inside. You hesitated, your hand hovering over the door handle. Are you sure? You seem off. Tay turned back to you, and for a split second, his mask cracked again. I'm fine, he said, forcing a small smile. Go get some rest, little kitty. You studied him for a moment longer before nodding slowly. All right. Good night, Tay. You opened the door and stepped out, but before closing it, you leaned down slightly. Take care of yourself, okay? He nodded once, and you closed the door, walking towards your apartment building. Tay watched you until you disappeared behind the glass doors of your building. Once you were out of sight, Tay leaned forward, resting his forehead against the steering wheel. The silence of the car was deafening. He let out a shaky breath, his heart hammering against his ribcage. I have to tell her. He couldn't keep this to himself any longer. The thought of living in a world where you didn't know how he felt was unbearable. But he couldn't do it tonight. Not like this. Not when his mind was this tangled, and his emotions were this raw. But soon. Soon, he would tell you everything, his feelings, his fears, his truth. He had made his decision. He loved you. And he would fight to keep you safe, no matter the cost. The grand gates of Tay's luxurious estate creaked open, and the hum of his car engine echoed in the quiet night. The mansion loomed in the distance, its silhouette outlined by the pale moonlight. He parked the car, turned off the engine, and leaned back in his seat, letting out a deep sigh. His conversation, or lack thereof, with you replayed in his mind. Why couldn't I just tell her? His chest tightened again at the memory of your soft voice, your concerned gaze, your hesitant goodnight. The reality hit him hard, he was terrified. Terrified of rejection. Terrified of pulling you into his dangerous world. But most of all, terrified of losing you. Shaking off the weight of his thoughts, Tay stepped out of the car and walked towards the mansion. The faint sound of laughter and chatter echoed from the living room. Inside, Jungkook and Hoseok were sprawled across the plush leather couches, deep in conversation. Jungkook had his phone in one hand, probably scrolling through memes, while Hoseok sipped a glass of whiskey. When Tay entered, both men looked up. Well, look who's finally home. Jungkook grinned, throwing an arm casually over the couch. Did our boss finally realize he can't solve every problem by brooding in silence? Hoseok smirked. You look like you've been chewing on a lemon, Tay. What happened? Tay rolled his eyes and collapsed onto an armchair across from them, his long legs stretching out. He rubbed his face with both hands before letting out a deep breath. I need to talk to you guys, he said, his voice low and serious. The playful atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. Jungkook sat up straighter, and Hoseok placed his glass down on the table. Tay, are you okay? Hoseok asked softly. Tay hesitated for a moment, his fingers drumming against his knee. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said. I'm in love with her. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Jungkook's eyes widened, and Hoseok raised his brows in surprise. Wait, what? Jungkook blinked, leaning forward. You mean? YN? Tay nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the floor. Yeah. Her. Hoseok let out a low whistle and sat back in his chair. Well, damn. Didn't expect to hear that tonight. Jungkook let out a low laugh, running a hand through his hair. Man, Tay, this is, wow. Tay finally looked up at them, his usually sharp eyes soft and filled with raw emotion. I've been fighting it for weeks. Months, maybe. But today, when Hyungsik joked about her being his sister-in-law, something snapped in me. I realized I can't. He stopped, swallowing hard. I can't imagine my life without her. And it scares the hell out of me. Jungkook and Hoseok exchanged a glance. What are you scared of, Tae? Hosiak asked, his voice gentle. Tae's lips trembled slightly before he spoke. I'm scared of her rejecting me. I'm scared of dragging her into this world, our world. What if something happens to her because of me? Because of who I am? What if she gets hurt, or worse? His voice cracked on the last word, and he looked away, his shoulders slumping. Jungkook stood up, walked over, and clapped a hand on Tae's shoulder. Tae, listen to me, he said firmly. You've spent your whole life protecting everyone around you. You've taken bullets, risks, and made sacrifices for everyone in this room and beyond. But this is your chance to protect your happiness. Hosiak nodded in agreement. You can't live your life being afraid of what might happen. If she makes you happy, if she's the one who brings light into your darkness, then you owe it to yourself to tell her. And more importantly, you owe it to her to let her decide. Tae's eyes flickered up to meet theirs. But what if? No what ifs, Tae, Jungkook interrupted. If you love her, tell her. Don't let fear steal this away from you. The heavy atmosphere slowly dissolved as Jungkook's mischievous grin returned. But man. I can't believe Kim Taeyoung, the cold, intimidating mafia boss, is scared of a girl. Hosiak snorted, covering his mouth to hide his laugh. Shut up, Tae muttered, glaring at them. Do you blush when she talks to you? Oh my god, you do, don't you? Jungkook teased, leaning closer. Tae, do you doodle her name in your notebook during meetings? Hosiak added, laughing. Tae groaned and buried his face in his hands. I regret this already. Jungkook clapped him on the back. Nah, man. This is golden. You're smitten, and it's adorable. Hosiak chuckled, shaking his head. Don't worry, Tae. We'll stop, eventually. After the laughter died down, Tae sat back up, his expression more serious again. I want to tell her. Properly. I want her to know how much she means to me. But I don't know how to do it. How do I make sure she doesn't reject me? Jungkook and Hosiak exchanged a glance before turning back to him. Well, Hosiak said thoughtfully, you're not exactly subtle, Tae. So whatever you do, it has to come from the heart. Yeah, Jungkook nodded. It doesn't need to be extravagant, though knowing you, it probably will be. But more than anything, it has to be you. She needs to hear the truth. Tell her why you love her, why she's important to you, and why you're willing to fight for her, no matter what. Hosiak leaned back, smiling. And flowers. Girls like flowers. Lots of them. Jungkook added with a grin, and maybe avoid confessing in a mafia warehouse. Doesn't exactly scream romance. Tae cracked a small smile, despite himself. Okay, he said softly. I'll do it. I'll tell her. His voice was steady now, his fear slowly melting into determination. The three men sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling over them. Jungkook raised his glass, which he had grabbed earlier. To Tae, and to the girl who managed to melt the ice around his heart. Hosiak raised his glass too. To love, and to not messing it up. Tae chuckled lightly and raised his own glass. To not messing it up. They clinked glasses, and for a moment, the world felt peaceful. But deep in Tae's heart, the anticipation and fear still simmered. He had made his decision. Now, all he had to do was follow through. It had been a week since Tae had bared his heart to Jungkook and Hosiak. A week since he had admitted out loud to himself and his closest friends that he was in love with you. But despite the relief that came with his confession, one thing had remained painfully clear, he hadn't told you yet. Every moment spent with you felt heavier now, filled with unspoken words and stolen glances. You began to notice the changes too. Morning meetings. You were sitting across from Tae in his office, discussing fabric swatches and the final designs for Hyungsik's project. Tae had leaned back in his chair, his pen twirling between his fingers, his sharp gaze locked onto you, not the designs in front of him. "Mr. V," you said, snapping him out of his daze. His eyes blinked rapidly as if waking from a trance. "Huh? Yeah, right. The designs, they look good. Really good." You tilted your head, a faint smile tugging at your lips. "Are you okay? You seem distracted lately." He cleared his throat, his ears slightly pink. "I'm fine. Just a lot on my mind." You didn't press further, but your heart fluttered at the way he had been looking at you, as if you were the most captivating thing in the world. Shared lunches. During lunch breaks, he'd sit across from you in his private office for lunch. But you noticed something peculiar: he barely ate when you were talking. Instead, he'd rest his chin on his hand and just watch you. "Are you even eating?" you asked one afternoon, raising an eyebrow as he pushed his food around his plate. Tay smirked lightly. "Watching you talk is more entertaining than this meal." Your face flushed, and you immediately looked down at your plate. "Stop saying weird things." But he didn't stop. Not that day, and not any day after. It didn't take long for Jean to notice. In fact, Jean probably noticed before even you did. One evening, you had left Tay's office after an extended discussion about the project. Jean walked in just as you left, catching sight of Tay staring at the door long after you had disappeared down the hallway. "Oh ho," Jean said, grinning widely. "What's this I see? Our cold, stoic boss has been reduced to a lovesick puppy." Tay's head snapped toward Jean, his ears turning pink. "Hyung, don't start." Jean strolled into the office, plopping into the chair opposite Tay's desk. "You've got it bad, my friend. And honestly, it's adorable." Tay sighed and rubbed his temples. "Hyung, please." But Jean wasn't done. "You know, I've seen you stare at plenty of things in this office: documents, reports, security cameras. But nothing gets your attention like her." Tay stayed silent, his eyes focused on the desk. Jin's smile softened. "It's okay to admit it, Tay. You like her, don't you?" Tay looked up, his gaze steady, and for the first time, he said it without hesitation. "Yes. I love her." The weight of those words filled the room, and Jin's teasing smile melted into something softer, something sincere. Jean leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "So, what's stopping you from telling her?" Tay's shoulders slumped slightly. "Fear. What if she says no? What if she can't accept this part of my life, the danger, the risks? What if I'm being selfish by wanting her to stay by my side?" Jean sighed and shook his head. "Tay, love isn't about guarantees. It's about taking a risk because that person is worth it." He paused, his voice growing softer. "Do you feel happy when you're with her?" Tay's lips curved into a faint smile. "More than I've ever been." "Then that's your answer," Jean said firmly. "You need to tell her, Tay. And not just tell her, you need to show her how much she means to you. Make her understand that you'd do anything to protect her and keep her safe." Tay nodded slowly, Jin's words sinking deep into his heart. Jean leaned back in his chair, a mischievous glint returning to his eyes. "So, how are you going to do it? The confession, I mean. Are we talking candlelit dinner? Private yacht? A skywriter spelling out 'Marry me' in the clouds?" Tay rolled his eyes, but a faint smile played on his lips. "It doesn't have to be flashy, Hyung. I want it to be meaningful. I want her to understand that she's the most important person in my life." Jin's teasing grin softened. "Then just be yourself, Tay. Speak from the heart. She already likes you, or haven't you noticed how she looks at you when you're not paying attention?" Tay blinked. "She does?" "Oh, she does," Jean said confidently. "Trust me, Tay. You have a chance here. Don't waste it." Tay's chest tightened with a mix of anticipation and nerves. That night, Tay sat in his private study, the dim glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. A small velvet box rested in his palm, the symbol of his intention. He had picked out the ring days ago, unable to stop himself when he passed by the jewelry store. It was simple yet elegant, something he hoped you'd love. His thumb brushed over the smooth surface of the box as he whispered into the stillness of the night. "I hope I'm enough for you." The vulnerability in his voice echoed through the empty room, but his resolve hardened. Tomorrow or maybe the day after he would tell you. He couldn't keep running from his feelings. The next morning, Jean caught Tay pacing nervously near the entrance of the building. "Planning to wear a hole in the floor, boss?" Jean teased. Tay glared at him but couldn't help the nervous chuckle that escaped. I don't know if I can do this." Jean stepped closer, resting a hand on Tay's shoulder. "Tay, you're one of the strongest people I know. But strength isn't just about fighting or protecting, it's about opening your heart and taking risks." Tay nodded, exhaling a shaky breath. "You're right." "Good," Jean said with a smirk. "Now go get her, lover boy." The soft golden glow of the afternoon sun spilled into Tay's office as he stood by the window, his arms crossed and his brows furrowed in thought. Jean leaned casually against the desk, arms folded, smirking as he observed Tay's anxious pacing. "Are you planning to walk a trench into the carpet?" Jean teased, tilting his head. Tay paused and exhaled deeply. "Hyung, this has to be perfect. I can't mess this up." Jean raised an eyebrow. "You've stared down rivals, faced threats, and dealt with danger without breaking a sweat. But now, you're scared of her?" Tay gave a weak smile. "Because she matters more than anything else." Jin's teasing expression softened into something warmer. "You've got this, Tay. But we need a good cover story for tonight." Tay nodded and walked over to his desk, picking up an elegant box wrapped in deep purple ribbon. "This dress, I want her to wear it tonight. Tell her it's for a business event. Don't mention anything else." Jean smirked. "A beautiful dress for a beautiful woman, huh? You've got taste." Tay shot him a sharp glare. "Just, make sure she knows it's important." Jean saluted mockingly. I, Captain Romance. "Don't worry, I'll handle it." You were at your desk, deeply engrossed in finishing a draft, when a familiar voice broke through your focus. "YN." Jin's cheerful tone carried across the office. You looked up and smiled. "Jean, what brings you here?" He sauntered over, holding an elegant box wrapped in a silky purple ribbon. "Delivery for Miss YN. Straight from our dear Mr. V himself." Your brows furrowed as you reached for the box. "What's this?" Jean winked. "A dress. And not just any dress, the dress. You're going to a very important event tonight. Tay specifically said you're his partner for the evening." Your heart skipped a beat. "A business event? With Tay?" Jean smirked knowingly. "Yep. Very important. Very exclusive." And he leaned in closer, his grin widening. "Don't embarrass him tonight, alright? You've got to look like the queen beside the king." Your cheeks flushed. "Jean Appa." He laughed heartily, stepping back and holding up his hands. "Hey, I'm just the messenger. Now go home early, get ready, and wear this dress. Trust me, it's going to be a night to remember." You glanced down at the box in your hands, your heart fluttering. As evening approached, your apartment was filled with the faint scent of perfume and the soft rustle of fabric. You carefully slipped into the gown, a masterpiece of deep purple silk and delicate embroidery that shimmered under the light. The dress hugged your figure perfectly, flowing gracefully down to your ankles. You paired it with matching heels and simple jewelry, letting the dress speak for itself. Standing in front of the mirror, you took a deep breath. "Okay, YN. It's just a business event, right?" But deep down, you couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was different. Special. The sound of a car pulling up outside your building made your stomach flip. You glanced out the window and saw Tay stepping out of his sleek black car. He was wearing a perfectly tailored black suit, paired with a matching black shirt underneath. No tie, just effortlessly stylish, exuding power and confidence. As he approached your door, your heart pounded in your chest. The doorbell rang. Taking one final deep breath, you opened the door. Time stopped. Tay stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes widening as he took you in. His usually composed expression cracked slightly as his lips parted, and he visibly swallowed. For the first time in a long while, Kim Tae-young, the enigmatic, untouchable Mr. V, was rendered speechless. "You, look," his voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "You're breathtaking." You felt heat rush to your cheeks as your eyes met his. He looked unfairly good, like he'd walked straight out of a magazine cover. Thank you," you stammered, feeling suddenly shy under his intense gaze. Tay cleared his throat, offering his arm to you. "Shall we?" You nodded and placed your hand lightly on his arm, feeling the firm strength beneath the fabric of his suit. The two of you walked down to his car in silence, the air thick with unspoken words and a tension that neither of you dared break. The soft hum of the engine filled the space as Tay drove through the glowing city streets. Neither of you spoke, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was charged, electric, and full of meaning. Every now and then, Tay would glance over at you, his lips curling into a faint smile before returning his focus to the road. You couldn't help but sneak glances at him too, the sharp lines of his jaw, the way his hair fell perfectly into place, and the quiet confidence he carried so effortlessly. At a red light, Tay turned to you briefly. "Thank you for agreeing to come tonight." You smiled softly. "It's an honor to be your partner for this event." His knuckles tightened briefly on the steering wheel, before he relaxed and smiled back. The car continued on its path, both of you wrapped in the fragile beauty of the moment. When the car finally pulled up to the venue, you were greeted by a breathtaking sight: a private rooftop garden illuminated by strings of golden fairy lights and delicate lanterns. The moment you stepped onto the rooftop terrace, your breath caught in your throat. Spread out before you was an ethereal scene straight out of a dream. The rooftop opened to a panoramic view of a beach below, waves gently crashing against the shore under a velvet night sky sprinkled with stars. The entire terrace was adorned with delicate arrangements of red and white flowers, roses, lilies, and baby's breath carefully placed in cascading patterns. The golden glow of fairy lights wound through the flowers and draped elegantly over the pergola at the center. A soft sea breeze carried the faint scent of salt and roses, and somewhere nearby, faint classical music played. Your heels clicked softly against the stone floor as Tay guided you forward, his hand resting lightly on your back. "Tay," you whispered, unable to find the right words. He glanced at you, his dark eyes shimmering with an emotion you couldn't quite name. "Do you like it?" "Like it?" you repeated, your voice catching. This is incredible." "It's..." You turned toward him, searching his face for answers. "This doesn't feel like a business event." Tay froze for a brief second before clearing his throat, his lips forming a faint, nervous smile. "Well, it's a very exclusive event." You arched an eyebrow, but before you could press further, his phone buzzed loudly in his pocket. He sighed, pulling it out and glancing at the screen. His brows furrowed slightly, and he seemed genuinely conflicted. "I'm sorry, YN. I need to take this." "It's important," he said, his voice apologetic. You nodded hesitantly. "Of course. Go ahead." He hesitated for another moment before turning and walking away, his phone pressed to his ear. The sound of Tay's footsteps faded into the distance, leaving you standing alone amidst the breathtaking beauty of the rooftop. You turned slowly, taking in every detail: the golden lights, the way the flowers framed the small table set for two, the distant sound of waves crashing on the shore. You stepped closer to the edge, resting your hands lightly on the railing. From here, you could see the vast expanse of the moonlit ocean, the water shimmering like liquid silver beneath the sky. The air was cool, but not uncomfortable, and the faint scent of roses wrapped around you like a fragile embrace. Your eyes fell back on the table: two elegant wine glasses, a chilled bottle of wine, and intricately folded napkins. "No one else is here." That realization struck you suddenly. There were no other guests, no waitstaff moving about, just you, Tay, and the quiet music playing in the background. Your fingers tightened slightly on the railing as your mind raced. This isn't a business event. The thought hit you hard, echoing in your mind as you pieced together the details. The dress. The setting. The way Tay had looked at you earlier, like you were the only person in the world. You closed your eyes briefly, trying to steady your breath. No, it can't be, can it? But deep down, a part of you already knew. Your mind drifted back to the past few months, every fleeting moment, every lingering glance, every tender interaction with Tay. You remembered the way he looked at you when you were lost in your work, his gaze soft but intense. You remembered how he'd smile faintly whenever you laughed at something silly. The way he'd quietly remind you to eat during late nights at the office. The way he'd subtly shield you from danger, even if it meant putting himself in harm's way. You thought about the car rides, how the silence between you had never felt awkward, how his small, fleeting smiles would linger in your mind long after you'd said goodbye. And then there were the teasing moments, the times he'd playfully call you little kitty, the way his voice would lower ever so slightly when he said your name. Your heart clenched as you remembered his shy expression when Hyung-sik had teased him in the office. Is she my sister-in-law? Tay had been shy, the ever-confident, ever-collected Mr. V had been shy. Your lips parted as you inhaled shakily. Does he like me? In next part. YN. He began, his voice barely above a whisper, his gaze locking onto yours. I'm in love with you. I have been for a long time. I don't want to hide it, I want to say it out loud. I want to be your boyfriend, YN. You shook your head, struggling to find the right words. It's not that, Tay. It's just. Your voice cracked, and you paused, swallowing hard. Tay's brows furrowed. What? Hey! Dear viewers. This is my dear diary. We're always looking to share more stories and novels. If you like our video, please subscribe to our channel. Your likes, comments, and subscriptions are my biggest motivation. More exciting and interesting novels updated every day.